Okay, we're in middle. We started Perek Ches last week. Right, it's 32 at the bottom, and on the top it's 24 in most of the Tanyas. Okay, in Perek Zayin, the Alter Rebbe is explaining the difference between Klipas Noiga and Sholosh Klipas Hatameis, total evil, things that are not total evil. And we learned that things that are not total evil, kosher things, you have the ability to elevate. And Sholosh Klipas Hatameis, you can't. And in Perek Zayin, the Alter Rebbe is explaining if somebody ate treif food and they went and they davened and they learned and they did all that, they still can't elevate it because it's bound to evil, and there's nothing that you're able to do. You can, until Mashiach comes, there's no way you can elevate those terrible things. At the beginning of Perek Ches, which we started, we're going to start Perek Ches quickly and get to where we're up to. So at the beginning of chapter 8, in addition to what he explained before that you can never elevate it, this additional thing is by treifa food. Why are they called Isser, which means forbidden? A person didn't even know, again, we learned this last week. He didn't even know it was not kosher. And it was accidental. He thought it was kosher. And he ate it for the right purpose of to serve Hashem with that food. The Gampal Vasake, not only did he want to, he actually did it. The Cardiff is he ate with that treif of food's power that he didn't even know was treif. He says, they still cannot be elevated into the words of Torah Tefillah like the heter, like permissible stuff. Why? Because it's still evil. Evil cannot be elevated until Mashiach comes. It's bound to evil. No matter what you're going to do, is not going to be able to elevate it. And he says, even if it's only a rabbinic prohibition, it's still you cannot elevate it. Because in certain respects, the rabbinic things are more stringent than the biblical things. Bottom line, total evil, cannot be elevated. What must you do to it? We must push it away. How do you push it away? By not eating it, by not thinking it, by not speaking it, and by not doing it. Again, and like we learned in the past, what feeds evil? Because evil exists from Hashem very limited. Because evil is not a substance that Hashem wants. Evil was created in the world. In order for good to be good, you need the opportunity to do evil. Because if you don't have any opportunity to do evil, then when you do good, it's not good. Because you have no other choice. Like angels, when they're good, because they don't have a Yetzer Hara, it's not worth that much. So evil itself is not created as an end, a purpose, a tachlis by itself. Evil is only created as a means for good to be good. Therefore, the life that Hashem puts into evil is extremely limited, extremely concealed. And therefore, evil on its own, if it's not fed, will die out, so to speak. What feeds evil? When a Jew thinks evil, speaks evil, does evil, our doing it gives it vitality and strength and a life to it. That's what happens when we commit a sin. Evil on its own has no basic fundamental existence. And therefore he says, this is where we're up to from last week. Even the Yetzer Hara, which wants evil things, who shade me shade in you doing, is from the demons of the non-Jewish demons, which means the Yetzer Hara of Umas Evdi Glulim, of the idol worshippers. Shedaf, like he said in the end of the first parak of Tanya, the souls of the idol worshippers come from complete evil. And therefore we feed evil when we do evil. But on the other hand, klipas naiga means my desire for permissible things. They come from shade mishadin yudoin. Don't ask me what it means. There's Jewish demons and there's non-Jewish demons. The forces of evil are called the non-Jewish demons. The forces of Kedusha are called the Jewish demons. So he says, even when a person wants to eat for lust and temptation, but the food is kosher, that's called demons. Because remember, we learned you can lower the food into evil because you're eating for the wrong purposes. Because again, this food, even though you ate it as a lust and temptation, and temporarily you lower it into total evil, but it can go back to Kedusha, like you said before, because it's not bound to evil. It went into evil, total evil, but it could be elevated. But, like you said before, but until you elevate the food back to Kedusha, it's evil. Until you elevate, in other words, if somebody ate a really juicy steak, okay, because this is what he's living for. So he's lowering, even if he made a bracha, by the way, but he's eating it for the wrong purposes. He elevates that meat into total evil. But it could be elevated. But until you elevate it, it's united with evil. And then, as we learned before, in the other parak, the Alter Rebbe said that even when you re-elevate the kosher food, but still there's a mark. Remember we learned you need the purgatory of the grave, chibut hakever. He's saying it again now, but here he's explaining why. A mark of it remains bound to the body. Why? Why should a mark of this food remain in the body if I elevate it to kedusha? He says like this: from any food or drink that a person eats, becomes flesh and blood. In other words, when I eat, even kosher food, but I'm eating it for the wrong purposes, so when I ate it, this food becomes my blood and flesh. So it's a permanent mark. So therefore, even though I re-elevated the food to Kedusha because I daven and learn and now do it for the right purposes, the food that I ate for the wrong purposes, the kosher food, but for the wrong purposes, that food remains in my body because it became blood and flesh. And therefore he says, like we said, purgatory of the grave, which means that in the ground, when the body decomposes, that's a torture of the physical body of the person that rectifies the mark of evil that we got onto the body because you ate the food the wrong way. Then say to clean it, which became what you accepted from the enjoyment of this world, the tainug of mitumis klipas nega, from the impurity of kosher foods, shade yudoin and the kosher, the Jewish demons, meaning evil that could be elevated. And he says, when don't you have chibet hakever? And he says like this: Elim kain mishleinena me'olam hazeh kol yamav, unless if you never benefited and enjoyed the world, kol yamav, your entire life, like Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So 1 second.
Who is that?
Rabbeinu HaKadosh was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, on his deathbed, the Gemara says at the end of Ksubis, lifted up his hands in a vow, and he said, I swear, I didn't enjoy this world, not even a small finger worth. And you have to understand, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was the richest man in his time. The Gemara says that the stable boy, the guy that took care of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's horses, was richer than the king of Persia at that time. That's what the Gemara says. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is remarkably wealthy. But Rabbi Yehuda Nossi on his deathbed, where you don't play games, by the way, he picked up his hand and he swore, and he said, Hashem, I want you to know that I didn't benefit from this world at all my entire life. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that if you're a person that Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, then you don't need Chibur HaKever. So the Rebbe asks, the Rebbe is explaining many parts of Tanya. The Rebbe asks, hello, who's Rabbi Yehuda Nossi? Not me and you. But it's interesting. The Rebbe explains it does mean me and you. Why? Because the Alter Rebbe doesn't say Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. The Alter Rebbe should have said, whoever didn't benefit, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. The Rebbe calls him Rabbeinu HaKadosh. And the Rebbe says, what does Rabbeinu mean? Our Rebbe. If he's our Rebbe, then we're his students. And if we're his students, on a minute level, we are able to reach that level. And the Rebbe is saying, without the Rebbe, that's why the Alter Rebbe doesn't say Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, who is really his name. The Alter Rebbe is just using the word Rabbeinu HaKadosh, because it teaches us, like the Rebbe said countless times, when it says Avram Avinu, in Pirkei Avos, many times it says Avram Avinu, and sometimes it says Avraham. What's the difference? When it says Avram, you're talking about the person himself as a great person. When you're talking Avram Avinu, when the Mishnah says it's our father, that means we're his child. And we inherited that trait and that ability from Avram Avinu. The Rebbe says the same thing when the Alter Rebbe uses the expression Rabbeinu HaKadosh, even though it's only Rabbeinu HaKadosh, but the fact that he's Rabbeinu, we inherited in a certain extent, a certain level, that we could do the same thing, if we want. Now, by the way, as we explained before, it doesn't mean that you only should eat food that you hate. That you hate. That's not what it means. We're talking about overly indulged in the food. Again, that this your whole goal, your whole life is the food. That's what we're talking about. We are not on a level to say I don't enjoy my food. Okay, but the question is, again, is that my whole life? Or yeah, I'm eating because I need to live to be healthy, to serve Hashem. So I enjoy my food. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a person who's overly indulged in eating of the food. And he says like this. So again, Klippas Neiga refers to anything permissible that you either, like you said in the previous chapter, if you eat it the right way, it becomes like a korban oila, carbon. You elevate it to the status of the holiest carbon, which is a burnt offering, the oila, kedesh kadashim, or you can lower into evil, and even then you can be elevated, but you need chibur hakever. Now the Alter Rebbe discusses other things besides food. Well, dvarim betelim beheter, idle words, not forbidden words. I'll explain in a second. Kagain ama'adet shena yachal lilmeid, an illiterate who can't learn, meaning like this. There's in Torah, and this is in Halach also, by the way, that there's something called dvarim o asurim, forbidden words. Lashon hara, gossip, Meitzi Shem, now speaking bad about people, what's called nivel pad, disgusting language, foul language. That's all forbidden words. Now there's something called Dvarim B'Telim. Dvarim B'Telim means idle words. They're not evil. There's no benefit to it though. You just, like you see in America, hacking a Chinik. You're just talking. It's not forbidden. So therefore, you can't say Shosh Kibsat Tameis, but it's Kedusha. And the Poskin, it's interesting, Mashah, the Poskin write, the sin of Dvarim B'Telim are not the words themselves. It's the fact that you're supposed to be learning instead. You're supposed to be learning. Why aren't you learning? But therefore, the Alter Rebbe adds over here, on a Ma'aretz that cannot learn. And in fact, even on this, the Rebbe asks, what do you mean he can't learn? Let him say Tilim, let him say Chumash, let him say something of Torah Shabbat. unless if you're talking that he can't even do that. So what happens, Dvarim B'Telim? That also has a negative impact on the person. And he says, how do you get purified from Dvarim B'Telim? Again, because it's not evil, but still you're not learning. He says, there's another thing called kafakela. Okay? Now, what does kafakela mean? In English, it's translated as the hollow of a sling. Now, basically, it's based on a pasuk in Shmuel. But kafakela, the punishment of kafakela, the Zohar says, is like this. After 120 years, when the neshama goes upstairs, the neshama is like going through a slingshot. Up, back, up, and down. What's the punishment, the Zohar says? Zohar says, kafakela means they take the neshama, and the neshama sees the truth of Gan Eden, and then they show him all this evil talk. I mean, not evil talk, the talk, non-holy talk that he talked in this world. They show him the fake world. They show him the real world, Elam Ha'emes, Gan Eden, and then they sling the neshama back to earth, that the neshama, this is after the person dies, but the neshama should see the falseness of the world, and that's a tremendous torture for the neshama. But that cleans the Dvarim B'Telim B'Heter. Now, Bal Chiva Kever, I don't know what it says, how you can stop it, but Kafakela is brought down, the Friedrich Rebbe writes, and the Rebbe brings this down in many different places, by memorizing words of Torah, Mishnayos, Tanya, and when you're walking in the street, you always say words of Torah. Saying a lot of words of Torah rectify and stop the person from having to do kafakela. But the Dvarim Asurim, Alter Rebbe continues, for forbidden words, Kamei Leitzanis, Makari, Lashon Hara, which are Bishol Shlipis Atmeis Legambri, which are from complete evil, when you speak forbidden words, and kafakela levade mel l'tayra lavet tumasim yanefesh. Then kafakela is not enough. The slingshot pain is not going to do it. Latzricha leiled legehenim. You have to go to Gehinnom, purgatory, hell, whatever you want to call it. Meaning like this. Let me explain this thing without the Rebbe saying over here. Unlike other religions, Gehinnom, hell, is not a damnation. It's not purgatory that the soul is damned for what it did in this world. To use Gashmiistic physical analogies for spiritual things, in other words, like this. The neshama comes into the world. The neshama comes down clean from Gan Eden. The neshama is born, neshama is clean. Throughout the years, neshama did mitzvahs, neshama did averos, in the body. Now, after 120 years, if the person didn't do tshuva, so what happens? The neshama comes up, but it has clean and dirty. It has mitzvahs, purity, and it has averos, which are impure. For the neshama to go back to Gan Eden, you got to be clean. Dirty neshamas are not allowed in Gan Eden. Again, dirty doesn't mean physically dirty, it means impurity, spiritual impurity, spiritual filth. So the neshama needs to get cleansed. So what is Gehinnom? Gehinnom is actually, to use physical analogy, a very hot wash cycle. Neshama gets cleansed in this fire of Gehinnom. It's a spiritual fire, but it's a spiritual neshama. There is, by the way, and later on, the Alter Rebbe will talk about this also. In fact, he talks about it in a few lines. There's a Gehinnom that we know. If you ask anybody what's hell, they'll tell you it's burning hot. The Ramban, in his introduction, the Alter Rebbe quotes at the beginning, in the introduction of Tanya, the Ramban writes in his introduction to the book of Iyov that the hottest fire I'm sorry, the Gehinnom, the fire of Gehinnom, again, it's spiritual, not physical, is 60 times hotter than any fire in this world. So what actually happens to the neshama in Gehinnom is it gets cleansed. That's all. The more dirt you have, the more cleansing you're going to need. But sometimes the older generation might remember this. When the women would go down to the river, even today with the washing machines, yeah? Sometimes you have extra dirt spots. See, before you put it into the washing machine, you take a brush, or they used to have a brettel, you know, this, a washboard it was called. And it would be rough. So they would take the dirt spot and they would do extra rubbing on it. And then they put it into the washing machine because the extra dirt wouldn't come off in Gehinnom. So now the Rebbe says that sometimes certain Avedas, that Gehinnom itself is not going to clean the neshama. You need kafakela, the slingshot one. You need decomposition of the body, chibut hakever. Those are additional things that in addition to Gehinnom that the person needs. Now sometimes, sometimes, as Alter Rebbe will soon explain, there's Gehinnom Shalesh, the fiery Gehinnom. Sometimes there's Gehinnom Shel Sheleg, a snow hell. And that, by the way, when do you go to Gehinnom Shel Eish? When do you go to Gehinnom Shel Sheleg? So it says, if you sinned, you sinned, and you got, again, dirty by sinning, so then you have to go to Gehinnom Shel Eish for negative mitzvahs. If you transgress negative mitzvahs, so you brought impurity and dirt upon yourself, so then you need to go to Gehinnom of Eish. What happens though if I didn't do positive mitzvahs? I didn't daven every day, I didn't put tefillin every day, I didn't do this mitzvah, positive mitzvah, I didn't do that positive mitzvah. So what happened? Why didn't I do it? Because I was lazy. It wasn't that I actively sinned. I passively didn't do the mitzvah. I didn't put on tefillin. Well, I didn't sin. I mean, I didn't actively go against Hashem. I passively went against Hashem. Why didn't I put on tefillin? I'm too lazy. Why am I not learning? I'm too lazy. So what happens when you're lazy? You need to get a frostbite. You need to dump into a freezing cold mikvah. It wakes you up a little bit. Takes away the laziness. So there is a concept called Gehinnom Shel Sheleg, and there's Gehinnom Shel Eish. Most of the time we speak about Gehinnom Shel Sheleg, but there's also Gehinnom. What do you want?
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
I don't get this being going to Gan Eden and doing all that. You're doing it to a spiritual, a neshama, a spiritual.
It's not a physical fire. It's not a physical washing machine. But I said, in order for us to have a little understanding, I have to give you a physical analogy.
I get it, but it seems like God is giving us double trouble, like up there and down here. In the grave, we're getting the bugs biting us, and up there, we're getting also, it's like so much.
All part of the cleansing of the soul and the body. The famous Antoninus, Gemara in Sanhedrin tells it's a very famous story. Antoninus, the famous colleague, the Roman emperor, who was a very close friend of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Some opinions say he even converted at the end of his life. Antoninus said to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, you know, you guys, after you die, you have a way out of punishment. You have a way out from punishment. Why? The soul will say, me? I didn't sin. The body sinned.
Right.
The body will say, God, me? I'm a hunk of meat. Without the soul, I'm dead. So Antoninus said to Rebbe, you guys have a way out. The soul will blame the body will blame the soul, and nobody will get punished because it's everybody else's fault.
Right.
So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi answered him with the famous mashal. It's a famous mashal. Kids are always told the story, but it's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said the following: there was a king that had a beautiful orchard, and he knew if he hires a guard to watch the orchard, the guard himself will be eating the fruits because they're really luscious. So the king is thinking, how can I protect my garden? So the king realized he's going to hire 2 guards. One's blind one's crippled. So what am I going to gain by that? The blind guy can't see the fruits. The crippled guy can't climb the tree to get the fruits. So the king said, I'll be safe. None of my guards can get the fruits. And this went on for a little period of time, the Gemara says. And then one day, the crippled guy says to the blind guy, come here. We're stupid. There's luscious fruit here. You don't see them, and I can get them. So the crippled guy said to the blind guy, let me sit on your shoulder. You'll take me, and I'll guide you where to go, and we'll pick the fruits, and we'll eat the fruits. Brilliant. And they did it, and they ate the fruits. The next day, the king comes to his garden, and he sees the fruits are not there. So he turns to the blind man, and he says, where's the fruit? He said, me? I'm blind. I couldn't see the fruit. What do you want from me? He goes to the crippled guy. He says, what do you want from me? I'm crippled. So what did the king do? He put the crippled guy on top of the blind guy, and he beat them both together. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said to Antoninus, who's going to get punished? The neshama blames the body blames the neshama. Bottom line, Hashem said, I'm putting you both together and going to punish you. The neshama gets cleansed in Gehinnom. The body gets, this chibut hakeva, whatever other punishments there are. And that's the way they get cleansed. But again, in Yiddishkeit, it's very important for people to realize this. In Yiddishkeit, punishment is a cleansing. It's not a damnation. It's not a punishment. It's pashut simply. You got dirty, you need to get clean.
But it's painful. Doesn't it hurt?
You know what the expression, if you can't afford it, don't break it. You can't, it's painful, so don't do it.
Easier said than done.
The Gemara says, a chacham is one that sees the future. Yeah? So a certain person likes a certain food. They love it. But when they eat it, they get sick from it. The stomach hurts for 3 days. So a fool who thinks now will eat the food. He doesn't think about 3 days from now. A chacham sees the future, the Gemara says. So he won't eat the food because he knows now I'll have 10 minutes enjoyment. What do they say? A minute on the lip is forever on the hips. You know what I'm talking about? What? That's the women's story. But bottom line is, a chacham sees the future. So a person should realize, does it really pay to sin? I'm enjoying the world for 10 minutes of the sin, but look, I'm going to have to go through later. But that in life is like that. Everything and every aspect in life is like that. So he says, okay, so therefore, we'll finish here. So this is the punishment of the cleansing, but he says like this, Shos Klipsat Tameis can never be elevated. Klipas Naigo could be elevated even if you lower it into evil, but the mark remains. You'll need Chibur HaKever, Kafar Kelo, whatever the punishment is, or you have to go to Gehinnom. But technically, you can elevate it. It's something which could be elevated, even though you ate it for the wrong purposes. But because it was kosher, it went into evil, but it could be elevated. Once again, this class was sponsored by David and Yoel Gallup for tonight's the 30th wedding anniversary. Again, bis 100 and Sadzik.
Thank you.
A lot of talk.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, don't forget Monday. By the way, Saturday night, we start saying the same Talmudata in the Shmoneh Saturday night. And this week is Shabbos is Yutas Kislev. Don't forget. Very important day.
Good Shabbos.
All right, everybody. Have a good Shabbos and a very good rest of the week.